It's been almost 3 years since today's verdict has been in the studio. Since that time, we've been providing you with essential information throughout the pandemic and doing it remotely from home. I want to say it feels great to be back. I want to thank our guests for being here and to the production crew for making this possible. Well, coming up on this edition of today's verdict, the new transparency law peels back salary ranges up front in job posts, and an employment attorney will tell us everything we need to know. Also, we have less than a week away until Election Day, and advocates are demanding to open an early voting location on Rikers Island. Finally, is Mayor Adams in violation of the 2019 city law requiring 150 miles of bus lanes by 2026? Riders Alliance is here to give us that answer. As you can see, we have much to get to, so stay tuned. Today's verdict starts right now. All right, hello and welcome to today's verdict, the interactive show that gives you your legal rights and options. I'm your host and trial attorney, David Lesch. Today's verdict is always encouraging you to stay connected, so make sure to tweet me at David Lesch and hashtag Ask Today's Verdict if you have a question. And check us out at bronxnet.tv. Have you ever wondered what the salary of a job you are applying for is, or how much the old employee was making? Well, a new salary transparency law took effect in New York City this week, requiring most employers to provide salary ranges on job posts. Here to tell us more is employment attorney Peter Rahbar. Peter, thanks for being here. And I want you to know you're the first guest that we have in studio in almost 3 years, and it just feels good just to feel. I feel the energy. It just feels good, Peter.
Yeah,
I have to say.
It feels great, David, and it's such an honor to be your first guest here talking about what might be one of the hottest topics in employment law in a long time.
Well, let's start, a little bit from the beginning. Let's just say I have more than 4 employees, and I work in New York City, which I do. Now I'm looking for an employee. What before this law, what did I have to post or not post? And what has changed since the transparency law?
Sure. Well, before this law, there was a lot of flexibility about what you could post or not post. I mean, and most employers would post a job description, and they would post, neutral job requirements, education requirements, experience requirements, et cetera, non-discriminatory, criteria for the job. But now New York City has joined several other jurisdictions throughout the country in requiring employers who advertise for job positions to post a good faith salary range. So that's a minimum salary and a maximum salary, and it could be either an annual salary or a hourly rate.
Now, it's funny that you say good faith. In other words, I have to just do an analysis of what I think the job is in terms of how much I should be paying. So let's say it's for, say a paralegal. Let's say, maybe it's $45,000 or maybe it's $75,000. That's the kind of range that I would put into my post, I guess.
Right. So the law requires a good faith determination of what an employer would pay. So in some cases, it could be something, for a paralegal position, depending on experience. There could be tens of thousands of dollars that separate what an employer would pay to such a candidate. But I think a lot of this is to be determined. Right now, the focus is on getting the information out there, getting employers to comply. And then we're going to see what happens with these ranges. We've already seen some employers take broad liberties with what kind of ranges they're publishing. And if you're going to do that, then you better have a justification.
What was the rationale for the new law? Why do it?
Well, this is like the next step in several steps the New York City Council has taken to eliminate the pay equity gap that exists in our workplaces. And whether it's based on gender, whether it's based on race or any other protected category. And so they want the information out there. And the hope is that by putting the information out there, it's forcing employers to take a look at what they're actually paying their employees and making sure that, that there is equity amongst their employees for similar roles.
Let's talk enforcement. Who's responsible for making sure that somebody actually accurately posts what they think the job entails in terms of financial compensation?
Well, the law falls under the New York City Human Rights Commission. Now, they have their own team that's going to be out looking at job postings to see if they comply with the law, but also individuals have the opportunity to report posts that are not in compliance with the law.
Is there any kind of punishment? Let's say you don't. What's because it looks like I saw something about violations up to $250,000. That's a lot of money.
Yeah, it sure is, and there's no way to get employers to act seriously, or in this case, in a frenzy, without threatening them. And so what this law has is a sort of one free strike policy where if you're found to have violated the law the first time, you have 30 days to correct it. After that, if there are further violations, there's a wide range of penalties that have been set forth in the law, including simple things like posting notices of violations, but there could be fines, and the fines could go up to $250,000.
And who's covered in terms of the employer? I mean, what if I only have one employee or I only have two employees? Like, what's the cutoff where I must do this for? Like, what if it's my own shop? You know, I'm an attorney. I'm just hiring a secretary or a paralegal. One person. Do I have to do that still?
Well, it covers any employer that has 4 or more employees.
4 or more. Okay.
Now, in your case, it counts the owner as one of the employees.
Oh, it does?
And at least one of those employees has to be located in New York City. So if you're a company that has an office in New York City and the rest of your employees are on Long Island, you would still be covered. It would also cover anyone who's working remotely for you from New York City. So if a job is capable of being done by a remote employee based in New York City, you would be covered.
Women and minorities, right? I know they're the ones that have been complaining the most that there's been this pay gap, certainly throughout the city. How much do you think this is going to change what many feel is an unfair salary discrepancy among minorities and women? Do you think this will work?
I think it's a really positive step. I don't think it's going to solve all the problems that exist. I mean, these are real problems. I represent a lot of women. I represent a lot of people of color who have had pay equity issues. It's a very difficult issue to deal with. But this law, if it works, and I think it will, and if an employer takes it seriously, and that's going to depend a lot on enforcement, it will force employers to take a deep look at how they're paying people and whether it makes sense and whether they can defend it. And if they can't, there will be other problems beyond just, fines and notices associated with this law.
And what type of problems do you see?
Well, there could be lawsuits, discrimination lawsuits that result from that. There could be government agencies who
would you do that kind of work?
Absolutely. I've
So
handled
you'd
that
be
all the
representing the employees who would be
Yes.
bringing actions against the employers.
Yeah. And in fact, I do both. I work with employers to handle pay equity issues that they may suspect or to help them find them if they exist, but I also represent.
So any final tips? Somebody's watching today and they think they might have gotten a pay discrepancy. The job's really a $50,000 job and they were just offered $25,000. What would you tell them to do?
Well, I mean, you have a right to go to the Commission on Human Rights and file a complaint. I would start by just talking to the company. I think that's the more reasonable thing to do, and ask them questions about why a posting says one thing and your offer says another thing. And if that doesn't work out, there's always lawyers that can help you in these talks, and there's always government agencies.
Always lawyers. And listen, I want to thank you very much for being here and again
Great.
for being our first guest.
Thank you so much, and I look forward to coming back.
Absolutely. All right, we have to take a quick break, but up next, Legal Aid Society is here to tell us about voter rights for incarcerated people in Rikers Island. We'll be back with more after this.
We built a media network for you.
BronxNet TV.
Come learn in your new state-of-the-art studios at Lehman College.
At Mercy College.
And coming soon to the South Bronx in the Hub.
Inspire with your stories, culture, history.
Your Bronx on BronxNet.
Engage with us.
Connect with us at your channels and at BronxNet.tv.
Learn, engage, inspire. BronxNet TV.
From the Bronx
to the world.
BronxNet.
Welcome back to Today's Verdict. I'm your host, David Lesch. We are always encouraging you to stay connected. Tweet me at David Lesch. With less than a week away from Election Day, advocates rallied outside the Board of Elections demanding a more accessible voting process for incarcerated people on Rikers Island. Here to tell us more is attorney Anthony Posada from the Legal Aid Society. Anthony, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me,
The
David.
last time we talked to each other, we were virtually, so it's nice to see you in the studio.
It's a pleasure to be back.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about voting when you're incarcerated. First things first, you still have the right to vote, am I correct?
That's what's most important, David, is that people who are at Rikers Island, the majority of them, of the 5,000 plus people there, have not been sentenced.
Right. And if you're not sentenced, you're not convicted of let's say, a felony where you might not have the right to vote, right? You still have all the rights that anybody else, like you and I, might have that were a citizen of the United States, correct?
Absolutely.
Okay. So when somebody is waiting for sentencing, which happens so many times, right? And they're on parole, or they're waiting to be paroled, or they violated parole, and they're in Rikers waiting for a determination. And Election Day comes up. What's the process that usually goes forward for these inmates? Do they say, oh, okay, it's Election Day, let me take you out of your cell and take you to a voting booth? How does it usually work for them?
No, it's nothing like that, David. In fact, it's just filled with barriers.
Okay.
Because what happens is that people are restricted to just voting by absentee ballot. But it's not as if people who are there can just go to a specific place within their housing area and pick up an absentee ballot. What they have to rely on is the efforts that we have been putting on, along with the Department of Corrections, where we go with groups of volunteers to help people get registered. And then the Department of Corrections has to take those registrations and ferry them over to the Board of Election local offices to make sure that they give them back the ballots. And then there's a follow-up process to locate the people who registered to vote and give them their actual ballots so that they can cast their votes. And so as you can see, right, there's so many steps in the process and so many people get left out, people who don't even know they can vote.
So it's not the process of you just take them to a voting booth and have them, no, it doesn't work that way.
Absolutely not.
It's registering them and then making sure that they're qualified, and then once they're qualified, getting them a ballot, filling out a ballot, getting the ballot to there's so many different steps here. What would you recommend to streamline the process?
What we did this week was call on the Board of Elections to ensure that there's equitable voting access at Rikers Island by setting up a polling site there. We know that the Board of Elections, and we saw this during the pandemic, put out technology that allows for early voting so that people can go, even if I'm not within my district, I can go and show up at a site and they can print out my ballot, right? It covers multiple districts. And so if we had similar efforts happening at Rikers Island, so many more people would be able to vote while there. And this way they wouldn't be disenfranchised.
What percentage can you say are at Rikers Island that is entitled to be able to vote?
About 90%.
90%. So there are 90% of the people who are there have the right to vote. And what percentage of those 90 do you think do vote?
By a modest estimate, maybe like 15%.
15%, and
Right.
you said there were about 5,000 people there, am I
About
correct?
5,200,
So
yeah.
only 15% of close to the 5,000 people.
And that's being generous.
And that's being generous.
Yeah.
And who is it affecting?
It's primarily black and brown communities. People of color are the ones who are being disenfranchised as a result of this cycle of suppression. Because if the BOE does not step up, if they don't come into the table and actually assist by setting up a polling site, then we're just left with the same process, which is in itself so truncated.
Well, let's talk about the rally. You recently had a rally.
Yes.
Tell the viewers a little bit about it, if you could.
So we were outside of the offices of the Board of Elections demanding that they actually come to the table and discuss with us how we can make sure that people at Rikers Island have equitable access to voting, how they could have an opportunity to serve people who are there who are still eligible to vote so that they can take part in our democracy.
We have pictures up now, which shows the viewers what the rally looked like. Was it a success? Were there things that you would have done differently at the rally?
No, I would say we were able to get the message across. We were joined there by the other members of the coalition of New York City voting in jails. And a lot of media outlets picked up on the message that we were trying to convey. I guess the goal, David, is really to have the Board of Elections actually respond to the letter that we sent them so that they can actually listen to what we're saying and come to the table to discuss with us how we can change this process.
What about litigation? Does it look like this is going to get into the courts at some point? Is there some violation of, the 14th Amendment, the equal rights protections? Where is this heading?
We're not there yet, but we have been thinking about...
But can you get there is what I'm asking.
We're thinking about legislation. We're thinking about actually having laws and policies on the books that say that the Board of Elections has to do this. We want to start exploring that, and we have been looking into that.
And do you think you're going to get pushback from the Assembly, pushback from the Senate? Where is that going to happen?
We will get pushback, David. I mean, so many people don't want to just forget the people that are at Rikers Island or immediately say if they're there, it's because they committed a crime. But they're unsentenced. They haven't been proven guilty of anything. And so there will obviously be resistance to making this happen. But with consistent efforts, with making sure that the pressure is always put on them, I'm sure that we can get a change happen. This is done in other jurisdictions. And in Chicago, in Cook County, Illinois, the state passed a law, and now they have voting across their jails.
All right, somebody's watching today, let's say, and they know they have a son or a daughter, unfortunately, or a sister or a brother who's incarcerated in Rikers. What would you tell them in terms of giving the ability of their family member the ability to vote? Like, what would you tell them to do, if anything?
First of all, I would tell their loved ones that I understand what's happening to the person that's incarcerated, given the current situation at Rikers Island, where up to date 18 people have died, David, and so it's tough. At the same time, if they are interested in voting while they're there, and they should be voting, they should reach out to the guards that are located in each housing unit and tell them, I'm interested in voting. And this will, if they say this, right, at least we will get word that they are interested, and we will go to that housing unit and seek to register them to vote.
Good stuff. Anthony, I want to thank you for being here, and again, for being our second guest live in the studio.
Thank you, David.
It's our pleasure. All right, we have to take a quick break, but up next, advocates say the Adams administration has slowed to a crawl on bus lane construction. More when we come back. Welcome back to Today's Verdict. I'm your host, David Lesch. We are back in the studio after almost 3 years being remote. As always, we encourage you to stay connected. Tweet me at David Lesch. Well, a mega rally took place in Queens this week with elected officials and organizations pushing Mayor Adams to complete New York City Streets Plan implementation. Here to tell us more is Jolyse Race from Riders Alliance. Jolyse, thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, wonderful. All right, so buses. Some people think that buses take up too much of the road to begin with, but your organization wants to make sure that you get some extra bus lanes for the buses. Why is that? What's so important about buses?
New York City has the slowest buses in the whole entire country, despite having the highest ridership. And for so long, buses and bus riders have been left behind on city streets. Buses have been defunded, causing a ridership decline. And it's not fair for the people who are still stuck relying on buses every day. And I think that as a city, we need to realize the streets are for everybody, not just cars. Bus riders deserve space on our streets as well.
So what is the plan to give buses their own lanes, to make sure that other vehicles stay out of this particular lane? I know there are bus cameras that if you're in the bus lane, you can get a ticket. What does the plan involve?
So bus lanes and busways are a sure way to speed up buses. And like I said, we have the slowest buses, so they need to be sped up. They crawl at about 8 miles per hour in gridlock traffic, not getting riders to where they need to be on time. And the streets plan law mandates that the mayor implements 150 miles of bus lanes during his administration. And it calls for 20 miles of bus lanes in the year 2022. And we've only seen 5 miles of those bus lanes finished.
Why? Why is that? Why haven't they finished it?
So DOT and the mayor's office, they have the resources to make this plan work. We won funding specifically for the streets plan. I think it's just about political will and political power.
Well, getting back to the buses, because I've spent a considerable amount on buses. I grew up in Queens. I would take public transportation all the time to and from school. And when I'm in the city, in Manhattan, I have been taking buses fairly often. Buses are clogged. Bus lanes are clogged with vehicles that should not be there. Constantly double parked, whether they're Ubers that are parking, whatever. How much of it is the fact that there's no bus lanes to begin with, or the fact that even if there are bus lanes, there are vehicles who just don't seem to take into account that the lane is just designated for buses?
Enforcement is a huge issue that we are working on constantly. In order for a bus lane to work, we need cars to stay out of the lanes. But still, implementing more bus lanes throughout the city is always going to speed up buses. Something that we always are going to be advocating for bus riders.
And what's the goal? I mean, in terms of, you seem to be measuring it by miles per hour, from what I understand. But if it still takes a certain amount of time for riders to come onto the bus and to exit the bus, it doesn't really matter in terms of the speed, does it? I mean, you're stopping every block and a half. How does that change? How does a bus lane really change if the bus has to stop every block and a half anyway?
Well, we're also pushing for the MTA to implement bus network redesigns, which they're working on right now. And with that redesign, it would actually do something called stop spacing, which would make those bus stops a little bit longer. They do that in a lot of other countries with better bus service than in New York City. So that is something that the MTA is working on right now. And we are just trying to make sure that those redesigns get pushed out appropriately and that they're actually increasing service for riders.
Let's talk about the rally. You recently had a rally. Do you feel it was poorly attended, or did you feel you had the turnout that you really wanted?
Oh, the energy at the rally was awesome. We were there, we showed out, and you can see our banner right there, Mayor Adams, Bus or Bust, and we mean it. And we had several speakers and organizations there speaking on why we need this plan. It's imperative to people's lives.
Are you getting the proper press? Are you getting the word out? Are there? I mean, I know you're doing the rallies. I understand that, but sometimes I think, litigation unfortunately ends up being the way you really get these things implemented. What's your next step?
Our next step is to keep putting political pressure on the mayor. in whatever way that makes sense. Riders Alliance, we're a grassroots organization made up of subway and bus riders, and we know that the power really comes from the ground up. Our power comes from actual bus riders who are taking the bus every day. And we're on the ground every day talking to bus riders, making sure they know about our organization and about the fight that's going on so that they can become a part of that system of making sure that the mayor listens up.
Jolyse, when you talk about the bus lanes, do you also talk about the bike lanes as well? Is it part and parcel? Do they go together? How do you argue for one without arguing for the other?
Oh, we argue for both. They come hand in hand. We really need to rethink and redesign our city streets and think of other modes of transportation besides cars. So that is bus lanes and bike lanes together, of course. And pedestrian safety as well.
Well, you know, pedestrian safety I think, is number one, to be honest with you. But you could get injured very easily if you're in the bike lane and somebody's either biking the wrong way or they're just going through red lights and they're not stopping. What are your thoughts on that? Because a lot of people don't like the bike lanes because they feel that they're dangerous to begin with.
Bus lanes are dangerous only when cars are parked there and, you know, someone can get sideswiped by a door opening up. We need protected bike lanes. We need bike lanes that are not right beside curb parking, basically. They need to be separate from cars parked on the street.
All right, with Jolyse Race, Senior Organizer of Riders Alliance, I want to thank you very much for being here, and hopefully you'll come back to join us another time.
Thank you so much.
All right. Well, that's all the time we have for today. I'd like to thank our guests for joining us and, of course, you, the viewers, for watching. If you missed any part of today's show, be sure to check it out on BronxNet.tv. Also remember, if there's a legal issue or topic you'd like to see on a future edition of Today's Verdict, feel free to contact me at davidlesch@bronxnet.org or tweet me at davidlesch and make sure to hashtag Ask Today's Verdict. For myself and all of us at Today's Verdict, and especially at the studio, it's so nice to be back. Know your issues, reach a verdict. See you in 2 weeks.